As Etta James would say, at last, I finally got my hands on a Schwinn aluminum comp. It's a bike I know a lot of you have been waiting to see on KevCentral. I look at the aluminum comp as a 27.5 version of the Schwinn Boundary. Now the Boundary was the first Walmart bike that I felt had some value. The story of how I ended up with this aluminum comp really starts with socks. Because a while back I reviewed a Ceres bike rack, and one of the marketing people at Ceres saw my video and reached out. They even sent a goodie box that contained these socks. My mom, God rest her soul, always said, be nice to everyone, because you never know when you're going to run into that same person again. Turns out that guy is now with Pacific Cycle, and they own the brand Schwinn. So he reached out to me again about reviewing some Schwinn and Mongoose bikes, and the first bike I mentioned I wanted to review was the aluminum comp. And now those Ceres socks are peddling a Schwinn bike because of a single video noticed by one person. I think Mom would be happy with how that worked out. Before I jump into the bike, I do want to note that though they sent this bike to review, I am not sponsored by Pacific Cycles and they did not pay me. I don't do paid reviews. So like always, I'll call it like I see it. I said earlier a 27.5 version of the Boundary, and you'll see lots of comparison here, but there are differences other than just the wheel size. Most of those, but not all, are subtle, like the grips. The aluminum comp doesn't have comfort grips. It has more traditional mountain bike style, though they're not lock-ons or anything fancy like that, but they're also not generic. They have Schwinn branding. It also has Shimano Easy Fire trigger shifters, but a more updated version. This also has a threadless headset with an alloy stem and steel riser bars. The head tube branding is a metal badge with Madison, Wisconsin text under the Schwinn name. Quintessential big box fork. This is sort of a middling level, not the cheapest but definitely not the best. This is the same fork you see on most $150 to $200 bikes, the difference being the Schwinn branding. The tires are also run-of-the-mill for a big box mountain bike, generic 27.5 by 2.2. As for the wheel set, it's alloy with double wall rims. They're no frills, but okay, and they came out of the box with no truing issues, so I guess double okay. Brakes, they are mechanical disc on both the front and the rear, and all the cable routing is on the frame under the tubes. Speaking of the frame, it's an aluminum frame with welds that are free of any pits or voids, and I guess it's reasonably lightweight by big box standards. The entire bike weighs in at 33.2 pounds. Drivetrain-wise, the aluminum comp is also very typical, with its metal and plastic pedals and the usual crankset with its stamped and riveted chain rings, 3 of them. The bottom bracket is a square taper cartridge style. And up front is a generic derailleur, just like on the Boundary. It's generic, but the chain is a KMC. It's a KMC Z series. This freewheel is also common at this price, 7-speed, 14 to 28 tooth, far from my favorite, but expected. 3x7, so that's 21 speeds, and the rear derailleur, that's a Shimano Tourney, something we're starting to see more commonly now. Most of the other is all typical, a quick release seat clamp, a steel seat post, but the saddle, it doesn't have a very pronounced relief groove, but it does have 2 raised areas that look and feel like gel. I don't think they are gel, but it's going to be interesting to see if this is comfortable. For those that follow my videos regularly, you can see that this is very similar to a Schwinn Boundary. But does it ride like a Boundary? Well, let me step back and look at it as its own bike, because this has lots of mountain bike styling. Does that make it a mountain bike? Let me say that most of the people that are going to buy this are probably going to ride it on city streets, maybe down sidewalks or for a commuter bike, and for all practical purposes, for those types of tasks, I think it's well suited. But that's also where some buyers can get tripped up, because it has that look and it has a front suspension that looks like it can take on some rough terrain. And it can, depending upon where rough terrain sits, on a very sliding scale of opinions. Yards and curbs, they're a cakewalk for it. And if you step it up to bike paths, or even maybe smooth, dirt-packed trails, still well within its capabilities. There's even fun to be had on muddy sections of paved trails. But you also need to know both your limits and the limits of the bike. That includes climbing, because 3x7 drivetrain, 14 to 28 tooth freewheel, it does take some effort. But what about the mountain bike aspect and actual mountain bike trails? Well, just like the Schwinn Boundary, it's a yes and a no. The reality is that the drivetrains and forks on bikes in this price range just aren't made for hard riding. At least it's not the lowest level big box suspension fork. What I'm saying is that it doesn't take much to push it outside of its limits, or at the very least, push it to the point that it bottoms out regularly. That said, it can be used on mountain bike trails if the trail is cherry-picked, because most mountain bike trails have a section of smooth single track. Now, this isn't going to wow anyone or give a feeling of total dominance, but for a budget shopper, if it's taken easy on a cherry-picked single track, I'm able to have some fun with it. I wouldn't be comfortable on this bike going down these same trails at full speed, but remember, limits, and also the Tourney's gonna make noise. But on this bike it's shifted without fail. I haven't had any chain drops, and that's something that I can't say for every bike I've ridden here, even some that cost twice what this one does. I think the biggest complaint a rider with this bike on a trail is gonna have is with that front suspension and just all the noise, because it makes lots of complaints even on some slight bumps, and that's where it's hitting its limits. That's where the rider needs to dial it back a bit and find a smoother path. So in a nutshell, yes, I was able to ride this on a mountain bike trail, as long as I remembered to stay in the smooth areas and not push the bike too hard. So I'd say it's more a mountain style experience than actual mountain bike, at least in its factory form. Now anything can be upgraded, but it's fair to note that my local bike shop has bikes that cost $500 that share many of the same components. They also sell those as mountain bikes, so by those standards, this is a mountain bike too. But it's really all about pricing the right bike for what you need. In my opinion, on smooth paths, this is more than capable of delivering some fun for under $200. I think if I were to throw a new fork on this and maybe a few other small upgrades, it could come close to rivaling that $500 bike at the local bike shop, at least in terms of limitations versus dollar amount spent. Now some of the components here are generic, but that's fine. These tires, I've ridden tires like this on these trails before, and they work well, they just wear out faster. That fork, I mean, it's definitely a big box fork, but at least the seals work. It's not shooting oil out all over the stanchions, but it is what it is. Now, I've ridden enough of these big box bikes that I had a general idea of what this was going to ride like before I even got on it, but surprisingly, that gel-esque saddle, that's proven to be decently comfortable on the short term. We'll see how it holds up. Now, there are a couple of things I need to point out, like the quick release on the front wheel. Yeah, the rear, it's a bolt-on setup, just like the Schwinn Boundary. But this is 2019, so even on a $200 bike, I kind of expect a quick release on the rear. Also worth note, at least for people like me that have a favorite set of bars, the factory bar stem combo isn't 31.8, so swapping out for my favorite bar will mean a new stem too. So big question time, is this a 27.5 version of the Schwinn Boundary? I mean, it does share many of the same components. But no, it is not. It is a different bike with a totally different geometry. And to me, that's a biggie, because on the Boundary, I could rub my foot on the front tire. That doesn't happen on the aluminum comp. Plus, this is $30 cheaper now. So save $30, 27.5 wheels, which are my favorite, and great geometry. I'm thinking this would have definitely made my top 5 list had I have had it at the time of that video. Plus, I like that the star pattern on the disc rotors matches the star graphic on the top tube. And cool or not, dual purpose bike, the kickstand fits. So there's my first look at the Schwinn aluminum comp. Now normally my next step is to start thinking about upgrades, but I'm going to take a different approach here. Most of the people likely to be looking for a bike like this are on a limited budget, so I'm going to approach any upgrades or changes from a practical and logical perspective. That means I'm going to spend less than $50, make a few changes that I think will make this even better. I want to mention that my patrons, they get an early behind the scenes peek at where I'm going with these mods, and you can too for as little as $2 a month by being a patron. And as a patron, you get a chance at a random shout out like today's, Tech Geek 10. Thanks so much for being a patron, Tech Geek 10. And also as a patron, you get a free KevCentral sticker. There's a link in the description, one also on my website, KevCentral.com. But patron or not, there's more KevCentral content to come, so make sure you're subscribed because that's free. Thanks so much for watching and have a great day.